project. Right, this news just in. It is regarding HS2. That's the government's planned multi-billion pound high-speed rail link. Very, very controversial. The High Court has just ruled that government consultations on compensating those affected by the proposed HS2 link are unlawful. So that news just in. We don't know the details. We don't know the explanation. We don't know why Mr. Justice Ousley has come to that conclusion. But it will be very good news for those people who are trying to stop this whole project. The first phase of the project, linking London and Birmingham, scheduled to be up and running by 2025. Super fast trains, London, Birmingham, eventually to here in the north of England. Now, the ruling from the High Court today is because a judicial review was brought back in December by 4 sets of claimants, a group of 15 local authorities, HS2 Action Alliance, Heathrow Hub Limited and Aylesbury Park Golf Club. And these are a group of people, effectively, who are really unhappy with the route because they felt it would blight their area. So what they argued was that the consultations effectively left them in the dark. And what we have from Mr. Justice Ousley in the last couple of minutes is that the government consultations on compensating those affected are unlawful. Right, let's get immediate reaction from Andrew Mason, chair of the Church Fenton Parish Council in North Yorkshire, which is on the new route. Adam Thomas lives in South Heath near Great Missenden in Buckinghamshire. And Kerry Brennan is from the Hillingdon against HS2 in London. And you're outside the High Court, Kerry, I understand. Good morning to you.
Well, I'm inside.
Oh, you're in it. OK, so did you hear Mr. Justice Ousley announce this, or was it just a piece of paper he handed out, or what?
No, I was in the room and he hadn't walked in yet, and then I'm downstairs, so I came down because obviously I couldn't be on the phone in there.
Right.
So I haven't heard that. I'm surprised. I just walked past the chief executive of HS2 Limited and she wasn't actually sitting in the courtroom. She was just sitting out in the reception area as it was about to start. And
right. The one caveat is that this is from the lawyers Lee Day. So yes, it's not confirmed by our correspondent. It's according to the lawyers. So let's just bear that in mind.
Yeah, I was hoping to hear it firsthand, but obviously I'm talking to you instead. But all I know is there was a lot of points, a lot of detail. If we lose on any points, all points, some detail, all detail, this is just step one. I think it's totally clear from having attended the judicial reviews, and one of the witnesses is in the bundle as well, that they have made so many errors of judgment, and they may or may not be unlawful in the eyes of a particular judge, but there are so many more places for this to go. If we have one, that is the right decision, and it will make a difference to the millions of taxpayers that are paying for HS2, but particularly the thousands of families, massively increased since January's announcement, who are living in complete limbo while the government claim no decision has been made, whilst sending intentions of compulsory purchase order letters to families. So how you can say you've made no decision while you've chosen a single route focused only on that, and then their defence was, well, we haven't made a decision. Well, they have documents called the decision. So they confuse and mislead people at every turn, it feels to us. So if they have finally had someone challenge them, that's great news. If not, there'll be another stage for us to take it and get that verdict that is the right verdict.
OK.
But I haven't heard it from them now.
No. Well, Kerry, why don't you go back to the room?
Yes, I will do then. Thank you.
Yeah, so according to the lawyers, Lee Day, they say government consultations on compensating those affected by the proposed HS2 high-speed rail scheme are unlawful. We're awaiting independent confirmation from our own correspondent who's at the High Court. Andrew Mason, good morning to you, Chair of the Church Fenton Parish Council. Just remind our listeners what was being argued here, particularly when it came to the consultation.
Well, the consultation was all about, they were talking about compensation, and they've just introduced this into the northern section, and it's ludicrous. They're asking us to take views on something which, from what you said this morning, we've been vindicated in the first instance that it was unlawful. People's houses are blighted. We don't know where we're going. We're not getting any information from them. And it focuses around just wider issues, the 160 wildlife sites that have been lost and the loss to the countryside. So for people living in a rural community, as well as for Kerry living in an urban community, it's blighted our lives, and they're doing it incorrectly. And they've had 3 years to prepare for this. So we're
so
extremely...
so although you don't want the thing in the end, actually the process you claim is not appropriate.
It's flawed. It's completely flawed, and we're very worried now because if they've had 3 years to prepare this case and they've got it wrong and they've spent as we've heard in the news this week the £250 million that they've spent, and they can't get this stage of it right, they're already over budget, then it beggars belief if this thing goes on for the next 10 or 15 years where we're going to end up. I mean, I'm frightened, not just for me, but I'm frightened for all the people up and down the line, and for my children and for my children's children.
Frightened? Is that the right word? Frightened?
Because we've got central government who's trying to impose something that the people do not want. We do not want.
Some people don't want it, but some people do.
Well, I've yet to meet somebody who's read anything at all about it who's convinced. Really have.
Let me introduce you, if I can, Andrew,
Please.
at that point, to James Ramsbotham, who's Chief Executive of the North East Chamber of Commerce. The British Chambers of Commerce are in favour of this high-speed rail link. Hello to you.
Good morning.
Right, so we await confirmation about the High Court ruling from Mr Justice Ousley, but as Andrew said, he's yet to meet somebody who does want this. Explain to Andrew why you think it's important.
Well, we absolutely need to invest in a 21st century transport infrastructure for this country. The current railway network is not sufficient. We're not investing enough in our airports in order to improve that. We really have to get around this country, and our neighbours in Europe, and indeed our competitors around the world, are investing substantially in much better transport infrastructure, and their economies are growing on the back of that, and we cannot afford to be left behind.
Right. Andrew?
I think that there's a very simple answer to that. Between London and the 5 major cities, we're better connected than any other European country. It's just a fallacy. We've been connected for 100 years. I can get to London in less than 2 hours from York. This is a spurious argument. The argument's been lost economically, it's been lost environmentally, and they're now trying to say that we're going to get better connected. I can get to Manchester, I can get to Birmingham. All it is a situation where you've got engineers and architects and people of the sort who've overestimated what the benefits of this scheme are, and they've underestimated the damage.
Can I just, sorry to interrupt, I've just got a little bit more information from the High Court. Good. This is being reported by the Press Association. It says the government's HS2 high-speed rail scheme has suffered a setback after the High Court ruled that the consultation process for compensating those affected by the multi-billion-pound project, quote, was so unfair as to be unlawful. And what's going on right now in the High Court is Mr Justice Ousley is hearing submissions from various lawyers on the appropriate remedy. Well,
I think it just proves everything that we've been saying for the last 3 years. People who've been blighted for the last 3 years have fully understood this, and we've had HS2 steamrolling over the top of them. And, I'm all for investment, but don't promise me investment in 25 years on a scheme that's flawed. We want investment now.
Adam Thomas, what do you make of this ruling today?
Well, we've been absolutely vindicated. This is what we've been saying that the government have been doing, not just on the compensation, but on other areas as well. It's been an absolute farce. It is like the West Coast Main Line fiasco all over again.
Well, tell our listeners who aren't involved or don't live near this proposed route, what you say has been the problem with the consultation process.
It's been absolute lip service from the start. On the compensation, particularly, they asked. They didn't give us all the information that we needed to make judgments.
Right.
They didn't give us hardly any information at all. They then, when they asked us to fill in questionnaires, they lost them. We then found out that out of, I think it was 26,000 people who said the compensation scheme that they were proposing wasn't fair, only 3 people out of 26,000 wrote that it was, and they went with the 3 people. In the days to come, you are going to be amazed at the ineptitude of what the government has done.
James Ramsbotham, that doesn't sound particularly diligent, does it?
No, and I'm not here to be an apologist for the Department for Transport, which I do not think have covered themselves in glory. I think this is part of a much bigger issue, which is actually how we get development to happen in this country, because we do take so long with all of our processes, and once we've gone through the planning appeals and everything else, actually we've got to find ways to get things done, because we are being left behind.
In a way, I agree with you, but this is one of the problems that the government has done, is they've tried to railroad this through without going through the proper channels. For instance, we've got this far, they're already looking for tendering work to build it and to hand out contracts, and we haven't had an environmental health impact assessment done, so we don't know what impact is going to be done on the environment. Now, how can we be talking about compensation when we don't know what's going to be happening to the environment?
What is clear is that as a result of this ruling today, and I'll repeat it for those who are just tuning in, the government's HS2 high-speed rail scheme, according to the High Court, the consultation process for compensating those affected was, quote, so unfair as to be unlawful. It's certainly going to mean some kind of delay, is it not? It's going to
have to have a delay. And again, on our personal circumstances, it was just incredible, because the government has set this such narrow line for compensation, which is they're only going to buy people's homes which are 60 metres from the centre of the track. Now, bear in mind, the track is going to be at least 30 to 40 metres wide. That doesn't include very many people.
OK, I'm going to ask you to pause there, just because we can talk to our correspondent, Richard Westcott, who's at the High Court. Richard, hello. Right, tell us what you've heard inside the High Court this morning.
Well, effectively what we've heard is that the government has won on 9 of, let's say, broadly 10 counts that were coming up against it. Okay, these are judicial reviews, so it's a group of people, there were 4 groups in fact, who were challenging the government on the way they handled the whole thing. Did they play everything by the book? Did they follow all the laws and so on before approving this super fast railway? And on 9 of the 10 counts, the judge has effectively said that there's no case to answer, as it were, that they can go ahead, that the government is OK and hasn't broken any big rules. They have found against the government on one element, which is effectively the way they consulted people on how much money they should get if they're affected by the line. There have actually been 3 consultations on that, but this one was done in 2011, and what the judge has found is that they basically didn't give enough information to the people who were affected by it, and also when they kind of came up with their package, you'll get this amount of money if you live this near the line, they didn't come up with enough evidence to back that up. So what the government is saying is, look, OK, it's a small loss, we'll take that on the chin, we won't appeal, we'll have that part of the consultation again. But what it seems to be key here is that it won't delay the project and it won't cost a fortune. Now, there were things here that could have really delayed the project if they'd had to reassess the whole environmental impact, for example, and that could have set them back a year or 2 years, but that doesn't seem to be happening. The opponents, of course, may appeal, and this may still be going on, but for the time being, it's the government who is happier outside court tonight. OK, well, that's interesting. Why will the project not be delayed if the government has to redo the consultation process for compensating those affected by the route? Effectively, what they're redoing is a fairly small part of the whole process. They've had 3 consultations on how much people should be paid. In fact, the 3rd one's just finished. This was a small part of the first one, so effectively it's not the whole thing. They're not going to have to go back to the drawing board. It doesn't even necessarily mean people will get more money, but they've got to go back and do the bits that they didn't do correctly last time, but it's not the whole thing.
Yeah,
so effectively they're saying they can run that in parallel.
I understand. And so work that is due to begin in 4 years at this point, unless there are more appeals and so on, it would appear to be on track.
I tell you what, Victoria, do you want to? We can talk to Simon Burns now, the rail minister, who's just come over.
You do that. Go for it.
Chat with him. Have you got time?
Yes, of course.
Okay, Simon Burns, you seem to be the happier person outside court today. I mean, do you feel this is a big victory for you?
It is a convincing decision by the judge justifying the government's policy on high-speed rail. It means that we now have from the judge a green light to move forward with the project, subject to the parliamentary approvals.
What's interesting here is it's coming out and saying it might only be a small thing, but you haven't consulted people properly, you haven't given them enough evidence, and that is the feeling we've always had from people who are against this scheme. They don't know what's going on, they haven't been told enough information, it's all buried away on websites and so on. Do you accept that you haven't really dealt with the public side of things very well?
No, I don't, because the judge's judgment in 9 of the 10 judicial reviews does not back up that point. He has found convincingly in favour of the government. On the consultation on the compensation scheme, he has ruled against the government because on a very small area, he feels that in the process of consulting, we could have done more and should have done more. We accept that. We won't be appealing against that. We will rerun the consultation on the compensation scheme so that we can then proceed fully with the authority of the law behind us.
Now, we found out recently this whole thing to date has already cost £250 million because you've got to employ lots of people to pick routes and so on. Also reports that you're worried about cost overruns already. I mean, this is a £33 billion project. Is there an issue there with cost overruns already?
No, we are looking at it very carefully, planning it stage by stage. We have got very robust checks and balances in to make sure that we keep to budget, and we will continue to maintain that as we progress further.
OK, Simon Burns, thank you very much. So that's basically it, Victoria. It looks like the government's come out of this very well, and it's all systems go for this project. OK,
well, that's really interesting. Thank you, Richard. Andrew Mason, Adam Thomas, what do you make of that?
If I can, Victoria, I think one of the issues that we've got there is that we will probably be appealing against the other cases where the judge hasn't found in our favour. But there's a wider issue. You know, when the Minister says that it's all systems go, I don't see how he's almost got the audacity to say that. There are people's lives that are being blighted by this up and down the line, and it's only just been announced on HS2 Phase 2, you know, by 6 weeks. We're actually just in the process of compiling our own information. The government have had years to bring this together, and I think the more people that become aware of this, the more they're actually going to realise what a complete white elephant it is.
Adam?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm on a personal level. I mean, I'm a full-time wheelchair user, and on the consultation, they haven't taken into consideration disabled people and how it affects disabled people's lives. The train is going to be we are 4 metres outside the voluntary purchase scheme, 4 metres, and which means we're 124 metres away from the centre of the track, and we will not be compensated in any shape or form. So this is how wrong it is. They won't go into discussions with me. We've asked the Minister 5 times to speak to us to talk about the situation for disabled people and how it affects. By law, they should have done a disability impact assessment, which they haven't done. But on the other issues, I've just been handed a piece of paper saying that on one of the ones that they have won, we are definitely going to be, on the environment, they have won on a technicality. Now, I've been told that the European legislation says that you have to do an environmental impact assessment on all major projects and programmes. Now, Victoria, would you say that this is a major project or programme?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, well,
yes.
So would I. Well, in fact, what they've argued and successfully argued so far that it's not a project, a major project or a programme, it's a high-level policy. And because it's a high-level policy, you don't have to do an environmental impact assessment.
OK, so that's an area where you
we will
definitely appeal.
Be contesting it.
OK, all right, thank you so much. Really interesting. Thank you. Andrew Mason from North Yorkshire. Adam Thomas is in Great Missenden in Buckinghamshire. We heard from James Ramsbotham as well. Thank you very much, Chief Executive of the North East Chamber of Commerce. So interesting. The government at the High Court have won on 9 out of the 10 arguments that were put forward for a judicial review by the various groups and organisations that are against the high-speed rail link. The protesters, if I can put them like that, the campaigners, the objectors, have won on the 10th argument. But as you already heard, they're going to appeal. Those protesters are going to appeal on some of the elements that the government have won today, according to Mr Justice Ousley sitting at the High Court. Right, let's speak to more people about this, reacting to this breaking news. Jason Norton lives in a converted barn in Aylesbury. Hello, Jason. And,
hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Susan Williams is with us too, Director of the North West Rail Campaign. Jason, good morning, Susan. Jason, first of all, how do you react to this news?
Well, I'm not at all surprised. From my personal experience of dealing with this now since it was announced back in 2010, I can fairly well say that the government and the various agencies, especially the Exceptional Hardship Scheme, seem to pretty much do whatever they want to do. So I'm not entirely surprised by it. I think it would have been fairly astonishing if all of the campaigners had won, to be honest.
Has it taken over your life somewhat since then?
Excuse me. It's been the only thing that's occupied my life, really, for the last 3 years. Just briefly, my story was a very simple one. I purchased a derelict barn to convert to a house in April 2009. The barn conversion was virtually complete in April 2010 when the railway scheme was announced. Unfortunately for me, excuse me, I had a short-term loan to do the development of the barn, and that expired. And because of the railway, I can't sell the barn and I can't mortgage the barn. And I've spent the last 3 years and I've made 3 applications to the exceptional hardship scheme, and I was turned down again just last week. So the reality is that I'm probably facing now bankruptcy. There's no other route for me to go. I have a barn which is now halved in value with no prospect of selling it or getting a mortgage on it. So for the last 3 years, I've been extremely involved, and it's really occupied all of my time.
And what about what you've been offered by the government for a compulsory purchase?
I'm not being offered anything from the government at all.
Because you're not within 60 metres of the track?
No, unfortunately, I'm 250 metres away from the track, an elevated section at that. So I don't fall under the compulsory purchase scheme. So I've had to apply under the exceptional hardship scheme. And unfortunately, they've used some rather bizarre arguments against me every time, including the last one, to effectively deny my compensation scheme. They still claim now I have no exceptional financial hardship.
Right. Well, you sound very sort of pragmatic about the whole thing. But I suspect inside you might be screaming. I don't know.
Well, I am, and unfortunately, I have friends that are barristers. In fact, they're both QCs. And one of the problems I've found is, I'm nobody in relation to the HS2. I'm a single person. I effectively have no money because it's all in the property, which I cannot remortgage and cannot sell. Therefore, what can I personally do? I don't have hundreds of thousands of pounds to seek judicial reviews of my own. I have no money to pay any more for solicitors or barristers. I've had to do that in the past. So I'm one single person that's effectively being persecuted by this system with no recourse, really. I have nowhere left to go. My MP, I have to say, David Linton from Aylesbury, has been in full support and has written letters on my behalf to the Secretary of State, but to still no avail.
Susan Williams, Director of North West Rail Campaign. The government is saying it's a victory for them this morning. They've won 9 out of the 10 arguments put forward by the protesters. How do you react, briefly?
It's obviously good news, and it's good news for the taxpayer because there won't be any sort of further cost in terms of the process in this regard. But I was just listening to that gentleman there, and obviously, fully sympathetic. But while I don't know the details of it, I'm sure his MP will be working with him to try and get a favourable outcome for him.
Hello, how do you react to this?
Hello, Victoria.
Hi.
I suppose, like thousands of other hardworking families who woke up on the 10th of March 2010 and found, through no fault of their own, that the value of their property had just been blighted by the high-speed rail line. I'm very disappointed in the way that the government minister has come out and sounded almost happy and gleeful that they've won this High Court ruling. I don't think that's the case in terms of how the government has been consulting with members of the public. So a little bit insensitive, I believe, by the government minister. And let's not forget, we are talking about hard-working families who, I say, through no fault of their own, find themselves blighted by this high-speed rail line. And the way that the compensation scheme has been managed by the government's own department has been appalling. Nothing short of political chicanery with the way that they've been dealing with individuals who have tried to claim compensation for this so-called high-profile project, which,
well, although
Mr. So, is branded controversial.
Mr. Justice Ousley declared the consultation unlawful. The consultation. Sorry, let me finish the sentence. Declared the consultation process unlawful. It doesn't mean you will necessarily get any more money being offered, or people outside of the 60-metre cut-off point, like Jason we heard before the 11 o'clock news, who's 250 metres away from the route. It doesn't mean he's going to suddenly be offered some money.
No, and my heart goes out to that particular caller as well. And like I say, there are thousands of us in very similar positions. It's very arbitrary to sort of say 60 metres, 120 metres. Where do those numbers come from? And frankly, those of us who have taken the time to find out the information about this scheme, and I really, really do take exception to being branded as a NIMBY, just because we are affected as individuals, why does that make our situation any less virtuous or or less valuable, should I say, than those who have a vested interest in this project going ahead. We're the people who have actually taken the time to find out the facts of the matter, because it does affect us directly. And, you know, these arbitrary numbers about where compensation can or can't be paid, an absolute insult to families who live 121 metres from the line, or in our case, our property is 190 metres from the line. No environmental impact assessment was done on this project, so how do the government know that the blight that will be caused by this high-speed rail line isn't going to run further than 120 metres, 190 metres, whatever the number is? It's an unprecedented speed that these trains are going to be travelling at. Never before have trains in the UK travelled at this speed. How on earth do the government know what the blight effect will be?
Because they've done an environmental impact assessment.
Victoria, they didn't. And I think that's why that particular element of the judicial review is one that may be appealed, because they called it a policy rather than a project. I'm sure your counsel will be able to give you more specifics.
No, we heard that from that's what another campaigner said earlier. Let me bring in Councillor.
So that quite possibly will be appealed.
Yes, Councillor Martin Tett. Hello to you.
Hello, Victoria.
I don't know if you heard the Rail Minister, Simon Burns, on the programme a little earlier. He was outside the High Court. He was absolutely clear. It was a victory for the government. He was very bullish. He said plans continue afoot. And, yeah, we will redo the consultation on compensation, but it's full speed ahead.
Yes, I just also heard the lady on the line. I didn't hear the Minister earlier, but I think it's very important just to look at exactly what's been said today, because it's not exactly what the government's spinning at the moment. I mean, first of all, a really good victory for the campaign groups in terms of the consultation on the compensation. Your lady just now is absolutely right. I mean, the whole compensation scheme is wrong. It doesn't actually take into account the nature of a high-speed line. It should be the impact rather than the distance from the line that really counts in terms of compensation, which is what we've argued throughout. Now, they're going to have to rerun that whole consultation. It doesn't mean they'll change their decision, but it does mean it gives us a lot more opportunity to lobby on behalf of residents and try and get that scheme changed, because it's fundamentally flawed at the moment. And the judge said that whole process had been as well. So good news in terms of compensation, potentially. The second thing, which I had to say I found totally bizarre, was that the judge accepted the Department for Transport's view that no decision whatsoever has been made on high-speed rail. This is nothing more than a high-level philosophy rather than any sort of decision. Now, those of us who've lived with this for the last 2.5 years, the residents along the line, people like the lady you just had on, recognise that there have been a whole mass of decisions on high-speed rail. The Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Chancellor of the Exchequer were announcing the route north of Birmingham only a few weeks ago. So to say no decision's been made is just, it's just fantasy land. So we're definitely going to appeal that. We just think that's completely and utterly cuckoo. The third area...
Come back in there.
Yes, go ahead, Susan, yeah.
Sorry to cut across you there, Martin. I would just also like your listeners to know that the Parliamentary Ombudsman has previously ruled against the Exceptional Hardship Scheme, which was the scheme against which blighted residents could claim compensation for their blighted properties. And that ruling said that the scheme itself was not transparent and not fair, inherently flawed, as has already been said. And what I would like to know, how do I get the answer to this question? Because I can assure your listeners, if you want to get an answer out of HS2 Limited, my goodness me, you better dig in a trench, because you don't get an answer out of them. If families who were blighted by this line have now subsequently sold their properties for a massively reduced price because of the devaluation that was caused by the line, can those families now claim that loss back from the government because the judge has now ruled that compensation scheme was unlawful?
I have no idea. We'd have to ask the Rail Minister.
Anyone can answer that question.
No.
It's a really good one.
It is a good question.
Can I also just mention, Victoria, one of the other sort of key areas that was challenged was actually about the process. And the important thing to realise is judicial reviews are about process, not about principle.
Yes.
But we argued that the hybrid bill process the government's adopting fundamentally just does not meet the requirements in terms of environmental impact assessment, the European Directive on Habitats, and so on.
Yeah, but the judge threw that out.
Yeah, but no, he didn't. What he actually said was, it's not that he said that they have met those requirements. He simply said it's the wrong time to challenge. He wants us to challenge at the end of the process through Parliament rather than at the beginning.
Okay.
Now, the risk that is that they're going to say, at the end of the process, we lodge a challenge, we win that process because we still think it's not going to meet that requirement. The government would have spent something like £800 million worth of taxpayers' money, and then the whole scheme gets found unlawful. So we think the key principle here was they should have accepted the challenge. Now we should have actually had that debate, and then we could have known with certainty whether it met EU law or not. Okay. Because otherwise they're going to spend vast amounts of taxpayers' money, could potentially be found unlawful, and it would all have been wasted.